All right, so for our first random topic, I want to talk about this interview I saw on YouTube again. Surprise, surprise. But it was an interview with this gentleman by the name of Sebastien Braxton. I mean, look, these cats got some interesting. They got some interesting names out here. But look, Sebastien Braxton, if that's his real name, I'm pretty sure it is. But just very interesting names, right? Nobody has the plain names anymore. But Sebastian is this guy who went from atheism to Christianity, and he was just describing that road, how he arrived at Christianity, and I found it to be very, very interesting because, like, he's not the first person that I heard of, arriving at Christianity, from like seemingly the opposite side of the spectrum here, right? Like, I'm hearing a lot of different people arrive at Christ, and in Sebastian's way, he arrived at Christ intellectually, right? Which also kind of reminds me of like a C.S. Lewis, right? C.S. Lewis was an atheist, and he arrived at Christ, and I mean, he's probably one of the greatest Christian intellectual minds, I guess, to have existed. Period. So it's just very interesting to see this gentleman go from one of the spectrum to the complete opposite end, and get there through his intellect, right? And that says a lot in a way that, like, God is calling a lot of different people from a lot of different industries, from a lot of different places, and it's just not, just one single spot. Like, I'm hearing of MIT professors going from atheism to Christianity, right? Like, I'm hearing of different psychologists, different professors of all sorts, different like bricklayers. I mean, scientists, historians. Like, they're coming from like everywhere, and they're all landing on Christianity, and I think it's very interesting, right? Because I come from a kind of a background in which I guess I'll explain like a little bit of it. Like, when I first became a believer, I actually got there emotionally, and what I found was that I really didn't actually get there until my intellect got there. So, and what I'm saying is, like, a lot of times, a lot of these churches, and I'm not in the business of church bashing, but you can kind of see like what's going on here. A lot of it really comes down to emotional manipulation, and they'll have their little altar call, and they'll say something that'll be like, okay, if you feel like you want to walk up and give your life to Christ, and this, that, and the third, and you get into all of their feelings and all that fun stuff, and then these people are going up there giving their lives to Christ, and then when the feeling fades away, when the feeling goes, fades off, and what are they stuck with? They're stuck with their same lifestyle that they had before. So nothing really changed, and I've seen that way, way too many times. In fact, that's who I was, right? So it's just like, emotionally, I was all there, but I was emotionally manipulated, right? And I was taken from a point of emotionality and given this new life, supposedly, and then come to find out my life looks exactly the same as it did before. And so that's the kind of like the downside to this emotional manipulation. It still goes on heavy today, right? But it's one of those things where I look at that, and I look at different ways that people arrive to Christ. I don't say that I arrived at Christ emotionally, but eventually my intellect took over. It's just like, wait a minute. So in this interview, Sebastien Braxton was talking about how he arrived at Christ and why he ended up there and all that fun stuff. And it was really good. It was a really good interview. And he was pretty clear on a lot of this stuff, and there was just so many sound bites. I wrote a lot of them down, actually, right? So one thing that he says, that he said in an interview, where he's just like, faith relies on evidence, not demonstration. And then, yeah, 100% co-sign with that one, right? Because it's just like, it's true, right? Like, somebody was going to ask me, like, yo, prove to me that God exists. No, I ain't going to do that. How? Right? But the real question is there enough evidence that, well, one, Christ walked the earth. Two, Christ said what he said. Three, Christ rose from the dead. Is there enough evidence to believe any of this stuff? Yeah, there's enough evidence. There's enough evidence. I mean, it's like, oh, scientifically proved. Well, which is kind of an oxymoron anyway, but whatever. All that aside, it's just like it really relies on the evidence. Do you have enough evidence? And the great thing about Christianity, and this is what Sebastien said, and this I agree with this wholly, and this is something I was saying for a while now. Christianity allows you to evaluate it from the outside. So you don't have to become a Christian to evaluate Christianity, which is very interesting because a lot of other religions, and I'm not going to tell you which ones I delved into, but or maybe I will at one point. But it was just like a lot of other religions, you have to become a member of that religion to understand what it's about and to fully experience the fullness thereof. Christianity is one of the only religion, maybe it's the only religion that you can be a complete atheist and still evaluate Christianity and be able to experience it almost in its entirety right from where you are. It's just it's so whatever. Right? Like that, I just find that very interesting, and that it really coincides with my experience in coming to Christianity. Now, I wasn't an atheist. I was just, again, I experienced other religions first before I ended up on Christianity, even though I was, kind of brought up in a loosely Christian household, right? But my parents basically they allowed me to figure it out while giving me some of the building blocks. Okay. Another part that I thought was interesting was that what fueled his atheism back then was the hypocrisy of Christians. And that one, I didn't necessarily feel particularly convicted by that statement or anything like that, but it was a thought. It was very interesting for somebody to say, oh, it's like, yeah, hypocritical Christians. And then it made me think of a whole bunch of other people I know who are not Christian, who are either atheist or agnostic or some other religion altogether because of how Christians are. And I honestly can't say I blame them, right? I get it, All I can speak for is myself and maybe my family. So what I do is I try and represent Christ in every situation, represent Christ to the best of my ability. Now, I'm nowhere near being perfect, but I hope I'm also nowhere near being hypocritical, right? So yeah, that was the thing that really, really got me thinking. And of course, it kind of helped me because I want to take those parts and kind of just make sure I'm shored up, right? Because ultimately, my goal here is to serve people as much as I can, for as long as I can, as best I can. And if there's something that I can take from that and, kind of implement into my own thing, then I would absolutely do so. And so I was really thinking about that, analyzing it. It made me kind of go think, about like how I present, how I represent Christ, and if I'm doing it in a good, great, okay way, right? There were two parts to like two sound bites, I guess, if you want to call them that. And I'm gonna read them off because I definitely had to write them down. The second one might be paraphrased a little bit, but the first one says this. The first one is basically, and I think he was saying it was like a Jamaican proverb or something like that. I'm not exactly sure about that part, but he was basically saying, what he said was, if a person is honestly mistaken, when you tell them the truth, they will either cease to be honest or they will cease to be mistaken, but they can't be both. And man, I'm going to leave that right there. The second one was, the moment you tell someone the truth, that there's evidence to believe in Christ, and they still vehemently oppose it, it's no longer a matter of intellect, but it's a matter of the heart, right? Because a lot of intellect, and I mean, that's another great phrase, another great soundbite, I think, and just not even just in terms of soundbite, but that's a great idea. Because, I mean, if you really think about it, if there's evidence, or you have to kind of, it really doesn't come down to belief, right? The belief is based on the evidence, right? If there's evidence that something is there, you basically have to, you almost have to reconsider your positioning. And if you don't, well, now you're not really, it's not an intellectual thing. This is an emotional thing. This is something on the inside, right? Right. This is something in the heart, right? I think that was just a great phrase. Great phrase. I can't knock it, right? So the overall interview, I thought was just, it was great. It was great. And it also explained a little bit, right? I was vibing with the interview, and I understood what Sebastien was talking about, because it was cool. It was cool. He talked about the amount of evidence that's in support of Christianity, right? And even down to prophecy. Like, he's big into prophecy. I'm kind of into prophecy, right? But it's just like there's other portions of the Bible in general that, I'm very interested in. But I will not negate the fact that a large portion of the Bible is prophecy. And it's also prophecy that's already came to be. So that's the thing, right? Like, if you have evidence to believe that this was written before, a certain thing was written before an event happened, it's like, how do you explain that? It's just like, well, a bunch of people were writing this. Well, were they? Right? Like, I mean, and it's just like, and the thing about it is, like, the amount of manuscripts that you have for the Bible, whatever. I'm not going to get into all of the minutia here, but there's enough evidence to believe in Christianity. And that's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm leaving it at. I mean, that evidence is what drew me to, and what ended up, I guess, what had me conclude on Christianity in the first place. After observing, after practicing some, after trying to understand all other religions, that's how I ended up at Christianity, because it was just like, there's enough evidence there. And and this is another big point that he was mentioning as well. It's just like, you don't have to turn off your intellect to be a Christian. And it's kind of weird, right? Because it's like, there's people out there that assume that because you're faithful, and because you're a Christian, that you just shut off all intelligence. And it's just like, no, that's not the case. In fact, it's the intellect that allows you to draw closer to Christ, right? So I just that part is very interesting to me. How Christians sometimes are seen as the non-intellectual group here, when most of the stout Christians arrived at Christ intellectually. It's interesting. So through their thinking, right, and their thinking, is a little on the nose, but it's right on topic, right? So you arrive at Christianity, or they arrived at Christianity intellectually. Why? Because their thinking trained their heart, and their heart changed. God changes the heart, right? Well, how? Well, we're thinking about these things. We're looking at the evidence, and we're going over the validity of the evidence, and then the evidence leads to something much, much greater than what the evidence is, right? So, so that interview was great. Okay. And I'll leave it at that, right? Let's get on to the random topic number 2. There's going to be a lot of flames with this one.